Part 3. The Machine, What Changes You. Chapter 32. Wildboy closed his eyes. He breathed in deeply, scrunched them tighter, but still he saw Clarissa staring at him from that balcony, her eyes glaring and accusing. "We were partners," they seemed to say. "We could have caught the killer, but you betrayed me, and now look what's happened." The hooded man had stolen the Tower steamboat, and it had taken vital minutes for the gentleman to requisition another from a passing waterman. Marcus Bishop had selected his 5 best men, and they'd set off in pursuit. Wildboy feared they were already too late. Rain lashed against him as he stood at the front of the boat. It was the middle of the morning, but the sky was dark as night. Gaslights blinked on the river banks, and thunder rumbled overhead. He wiped wet hair from his eyes and scanned the river for the Tower's vessel. There were dozens of ships on the water, steam ferries, coal barges, and trading clippers moored side by side, their tall masts creaking and swaying. Moving between them all was frustratingly slow. Wildboy wanted to yell at the gentlemen, but he knew they were doing everything they could. 3 of the men shoveled coal into the furnace, and brown smoke belched from the steamboat's funnel. Marcus came up beside Wildboy. His golden eyeball glinted in the boat's lantern. "This would be easier if you told me who we are after," he said. Who we are after. At least Wildboy knew that now. But he couldn't tell Marcus the killer's identity. He didn't know for sure if he could trust him. Was the gentleman's main concern saving Clarissa, or finding the killer's machine? "I've just realised that I never asked your name," Marcus said. "It's Wildboy." "No, I mean your real name." His real name. He remembered all the times he dreamed of being someone else, but not anymore. He knew now that he wasn't just a freak. He was different, and for the first time ever he was glad to be. "My name's Wildboy," he said firmly. Marcus smiled. "Well then, Wildboy, we have a killer to catch, a friend to save, and your name's to clear. Are you ready for it?" He was ready all right. In the hectic few minutes after the hooded man escaped, Wildboy hadn't only solved the mystery of the killer's identity, he'd also devised a plan to save Clarissa. It was risky, dangerous, but his friend was relying on him. The boat's funnel lowered as it slipped under the sleek stone arches of London Bridge. Through the rain, he saw St. Paul's Cathedral squatting like a monster over a sprawl of lanes and alleys that ran from the river. Beyond, a bright orange light flared into the sky, as if a huge bonfire was raging in the heart of the city. "Bartholomew Fair," Wildboy said. "That's where the killer's gone." It hadn't been hard to work that out. The hooded man knew him, or at least knew of his abilities. The killer had known Professor Wollstonecraft too, so he must have lived with them at the fair. That also explained one of the clues on Clarissa's list. Marks on killer's hood. Lives in place with low ceiling. The hooded man lived in a caravan. They drew closer to the riverbank, and a jetty crammed with steamboats taking people to the fair. Fights had broken out among the captains jostling for space. "Sir," one of the gentlemen called, "look!" Docked among the boats was the Tower steamship. A golden letter G shone on the vessel's side, but the boat was empty. "The dock's too busy, sir," one of the gentlemen said. "We can't get close." Frustration boiled inside Wildboy. He turned to kick one of the wooden seats, but stopped himself. Getting angry wouldn't help Clarissa. He needed to think. He turned and rushed to the side of the boat. Upstream, a rickety tavern leaned over the river, propped up by beams that jutted from the bank. The mouth of a large sewer stuck out beneath, trickling brown slush into the swirling water. "Steer over there," Wildboy said. "We can get to the fair underground." The gentleman hesitated, reluctant to take orders from a boy. He looked to Marcus, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of his head. "Do what he says," he ordered. With a belch of smoke, the boat turned. The paddle wheel churned through the murky water as they drew nearer to the bank. The men manoeuvred the vessel so its bow poked beneath the tavern's overhang, kissing the mouth of the sewer. Wildboy leapt into the tunnel from the boat and signalled for the others to follow. "Hurry!" One by one they came across. Crouching low, they followed Wildboy into the reeking dark. Marcus limped behind him, one hand on his cane, the other pressed against the tunnel wall. "You know this fair well?" he asked. Bartholomew Fair. Wildboy knew it well enough. Through a grill, he saw the dense mass of people cramming the street above. It was like a glimpse into hell. Everyone pushing and barging, screeching and swearing. A man spat blood into the gutter. Medicine men sold potions from trays. A fire-eater belched flames into the driving rain. Around a dozen travelling fairs came together for this last and largest show of the season. Shops, stalls and stages filled every available space, from the river to West Smithfield, the square where Wild Boys Fair usually pitched. That, he knew, was where he needed to reach. That was where he'd saved Clarissa. Ahead, a slant of grey light broke the dark. An island of bricks rose from the sewage where part of the tunnel wall had collapsed. "We can get up through here," he said. "We should come out close." He crawled through the hole and into a dingy chamber. It was some sort of cellar with rotten walls and crumbling stone stairs. It reminded Wildboy of this place where he'd hidden with Clarissa and Sir Oswald. That seemed like a long time ago now. Strengthened by the memory, he climbed the stairs to an abandoned shop, a shell of smashed glass, cracked mirrors and broken brick. Light shone in thin streams between the wooden planks of the boarded-up entrance. Outside, the rain was coming down hard, but most people were too drunk to care, dancing arm in arm through the downpour. Over their heads, Wildboy saw the peak of Mary Everett's circus tent. That was where he needed to be, but it was 100 yards away across the square. There was no way he'd get through these crowds, not with the reward on his head. Marcus emerged from the stairway. Wildboy saw the man's fingers tighten around the top of his cane and knew the pain in his knee had grown worse. "We're too far out," Wildboy said. "We'll have to go back down, find another way." "What is that over there?" Marcus said, peering between the boards. Halfway across the square, a line of policemen struggled to clear a path for a marching band and a golden stagecoach that rode slowly through the crowd. "That's the mayor's carriage," Wildboy said. He remembered how each year the Lord Mayor paraded to the circus tent to officially open the fair. "If we can reach those police officers," Marcus said, "they will escort us to the circus tent." "Coppers," Wildboy said, horrified. The only place they'd escort him to was prison. "Believe me," Marcus explained, "the police will do exactly as I tell them. We are a very powerful organisation." Wildboy was beginning to believe that. He was keen to learn more about these gentlemen who could order the police about to take over the Tower of London and fill its cells with condemned criminals, but he could think about that later. Marcus turned to the other gentlemen as they came up the stairs. Even though their trousers dripped with filth from the sewers, the 5 men still looked sharp and focused. "Gentlemen," Marcus said, "you must go ahead to that circus tent. I shall follow with Wildboy, have everything ready. We stick to his plan. Find Sir Oswald Farley," Wildboy added. "He'll help you." The gentlemen hesitated, still flustered that Wildboy was in charge. But a glare from Marcus stirred them into action. 4 of them brought out their pistols and loaded the plates with powder. The other yanked away some of the panels from the shop entrance, and then they set off, pushing through the mass of bodies towards the big top. Wildboy's plan was underway, but it relied on him and Marcus reaching the circus too. "So how are we going to get to them coppers?" he said. "Fight our way through?" "Fighting, Wildboy, is not always the solution. I should think you know that by now." Marcus gripped his cane and drew the thin steel sword from inside. "We are simply going to give them a scare," he said. "Well, I know these types, and there ain't much that scares them." Marcus looked at him, and another hint of a smile danced across his face. "There is one thing," he said.